The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Bonacci, 2014 Chair of the SLA Competitive Intelligence Division, and I want to thank you for joining our webinar. Today's webinar topic is using competitive intelligence to build leadership capability, and will be presented by Gina Applebaum, who is also SLA CI Division 2015 Chair-elect. But before we get started, we have a great year of webinars planned, and I'd first like to highlight our upcoming webinars for 2014, as well as take a moment to highlight our sessions that will be slated for the annual conference in Vancouver. We'll be tweeting these registration links for the following webinars from the @SLA CID Twitter handle. So if you're not following us, please do. In February, we'll be hosting Bruce Rosenstein when he talks about applying Peter Drucker's principle to the future of your organization. In February, we'll also be hosting Marge King, identifying and valuing your transferable skills from research to competitive intelligence. We'll also be hosting Peter Ozeline from Manzama, What's the Big Deal About Big Data? And in March, we'll have our own Mike Gruenberg, Buying and Selling Information. In April, Mark Chussell will talk about billion-dollar surprises and how and why business war games pay off. In May, myself and Lynn Strand-Meyer will be giving a conference preview. And in June, we'll talk about getting the gig, winning the job or project with consulting, user, and recruiting hiring manager. And in July, we'll take a moment to recap the conference that we have. In August, we'll take a look at global CI, economic differences, and impact on conducting CI or MI. And in September, it's back to school, how successful CI practitioners keep current and still work. In October, we'll take a look at defensive intelligence and risk management in the age of cyber wars and hacking. In November, we'll be taking a look at analytical tools, novices raise the bar, personal stories from the field. And to close the year out, we'll be taking a look at Tech Expo, tools, gadgets, and software, as well as emerging trends and issues in CI that you need to know about heading into 2015. Just a quick note about our conference that will be the annual conference in Vancouver and the CI Division's slate of sessions. A quick look at this. Gina Applebaum and myself will be doing Info Pros and CI Success, a practical workshop for competitive intelligence success from startup to world class, a session that sold out last year ahead of time. There'll be a quick take on what the heck is big data and what do I need to know about it, hosted by CEO of Cascade Insights, Sean Campbell. Borderless CI, researching international intelligence in emerging markets and trend identification. Applying elicitation methods to social media research. Practical tips on how to aggregate intelligence information. Another quick take by Dr. Craig Fleischer's analytical tools that deliver value. We'll also have a co-sponsored session with the Taxonomy Division, the Bionic Info Pro. Another co-hosted session, Public Policy, finding those who don't want to be found using social media and other cyber tools. And don't miss the cocktail and hors d'oeuvres networking party that we have hosted at the Fish House in Stanley Park. And then finally, to wrap the conference up on Tuesday, Intelligence Roles for Info Pros panel. Now, our speaker today is Gina Applebaum, and a bit about Gina. She is manager of intelligence and intranet at Bennett Jones LLP, a leading national and international law firm based in Canada. Her primary responsibilities include conducting analysis of market and competitive performance to inform the firm's growth, practice development, business development, and client relationship management, counterintelligence, and marketing. Tying it all together, she enables the collaboration and sharing of information and intelligence throughout the firm via the firm's award-winning intranet. And if you have any questions during today's webinar, please feel free to submit them using the questions pane in the webinar panel. Gina, it's all yours.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you all of you for joining us today. For some of you, this may be a recap of what you saw in Memphis, and for others of you, it will be new information. Either way, I want to take a minute and I want to just sort of ask a question, and we'll do this by way of poll in terms of helping us understand who's doing your job. So that's the question I want to ask you. Who is doing your job? And I believe we should have a poll that gets loaded here. I could be wrong though.
Yep, it's there.
No, I can't see it. And while you think about who's doing your job and you respond to that poll, take a piece of paper out from wherever you are and draw a picture of yourself. And you'll see, if you go back to the tweets from SLA leads, you'll see some of the pictures that people drew while they were in Memphis. So vote who's doing your job and then draw a little picture of yourself. And we'll refer back to this a fair bit, because I think it's important to understand who you are in order to understand where you're going and how you can lead in doing so. And for kicks, you can go back through the Twitter stream and see everybody else's pictures from Memphis.
So far, 91% of people are doing their own jobs.
Well, that's good to hear. Is Google doing your job? Think about that for a minute. How many of your constituents de facto run to Google before they actually come to you to ask you a question, and they type their question into Google and see what comes back and then come to you? And how many of them don't even get so far as to then come to you? They just rely on whatever Google told them. I know there's a few of you out there in the world who are cringing right now, thinking about Google doing your job, but
all right, the poll's going to be closing any minute now.
all right, well,
All right, I've been told the polls have closed. 91% you are doing your job and 9% Google. 0 McKinsey.
okay. So most of you are doing your job. That's very nice to see. How many of you think McKinsey is doing your job? So none of you said McKinsey, but it could, you could fill in Bain or Boston or any of your general consulting firms out there who tend to produce a lot of research and sell their research back to companies to say, here's what's happening in your market and you need to be aware of it. And I would argue that you know what's happening in your market and in your firms, or at least I hope you do, in your organizations, better than either Google or McKinsey. So I'm glad to hear that 90% of you actually think you're doing your jobs. For those of you that don't, you can take back your job by being better than Google, smarter than McKinsey. You can be a concise communicator and a trusted business advisor to your community. And you can do all of this by adding value through CI. And we're going to talk a little bit about how you can do all of that. So first I want to start with why now. Why is this an appropriate time for you to start to think about bringing back your job? So research, and this is a slightly out of date statistic in that it's from 2011, but ultimately research accounts for between 4.9% and 6.7% of the annual BD and marketing budget of the top 200 firms in America. So while many of you might not be with law firms, you understand that, it's an example of one industry that's spending between 5 and 7% of its annual marketing budget on research. And research in this case, I would encourage you, means things like competitive intelligence that can help you be more competitive in the workplace. The Financial Times and SLA report says that the evolving value of information management, the most pressing challenge for many knowledge providers today, is in a decline in budget. IT investment and headcount. Capital investments in knowledge or information areas are required by the majority of those professionals surveyed, with 58% describing the level of investment in technology and process improvement as too low. What that means is that while people are expecting more research, if we take these two statistics together, people are expecting more research but are being given less and less time to actually, or sorry, less and less resources to actually do this research. And they're not being given software, they're not being given IT support. So what can you do to bring those research fruits to bear? Library budgets are shrinking, but your demands are growing. And what you can do is you can start to add value by bringing in competitive intelligence into your decision-making process. In 2009, LexisNexis put out a question, what is the library 2.0? Everybody's talking about, social networking 2.0 and business 2.0, and what is the librarian 2.0? And I think what's really important here to know and important to pull out is that the librarian 2.0 will have a feature that forecasts the future. And that's sort of what everybody's saying, is that librarians need to stop being just about information collection, and they need to be about turning that information collection into something that is decision ready. And that's a term that came out of the Financial Times report, but it's also a term that's synonymous with what in the CI world we call actionable intelligence. So decision ready, actionable intelligence, whichever one of those terms works for you, the idea is that you need to start thinking about how this information can impact decision making, and how this information, whatever information you're finding, can allowing for forecasting of the future, which leads us to competitive intelligence. What is competitive intelligence? You've heard me say it a couple of times. And what it is, according to SCIP, which is the Strategic and Competitive Intelligence Professionals, is a systemic and ethical program for gathering, analyzing, and managing external information that can affect you. And you, in this case, is your organizations, as well as you as individuals, but more specifically your organizations. Competitive intelligence is primarily concerned with anything that will make an organization more competitive and able to avoid surprises from its competition, suppliers, and the like. So that whole idea of avoiding surprises is akin to the idea of forecasting the future. If you can forecast the future, you can avoid surprises. CI is forward-looking, so again, forecasting, and requires a vigorous collection, analysis, dissemination, and repeat cycle. And we'll look at that cycle in a minute as well. These are just some other definitions of what CI is outside of the SCIP definition. And then the one that I use the most, which is the last one here, is CI is using readily available information to connect dots and people in ways that make action happen. So if you think of the library as a hub, not just for information, but a hub for people, a place where people go to get information, to interact with information, to share information, and then you as the manager or the person sitting in the library takes that information, harnesses it, and does something that can make action happen with that information, you're doing CI. Many of the things that came out of the Leadership Summit, we reviewed sort of the themes for the last 4 years, and there were themes like future ready and agility, adding strategic value, and of course the theme going into 2014 is going beyond borders. And all of these things point to competitive intelligence. Competitive intelligence will de facto make you, if you're doing it well, future ready. It will make you agile. It will add strategic value, and it will take you beyond the borders of your regular everyday job. It will take you beyond the borders of what you're used to doing with information, and it will create a position whereby you're providing decision-ready information in line with your organization's strategic goals. So is CI a real thing? The answer is yes. And it was somewhat serendipitous that as I was sitting in Memphis, a couple of jobs for Qualcomm came up through the Competitive Intelligence Division listserv. And they were jobs for, I believe the title was a research and analysis librarian. That's what it was. And that to me is basically a CI role. CI job descriptions like this one are very real. In fact, this is one that I took from a real job posting for a CI role in, I believe this was in Texas. And the primary job description, if you look at it, is for mining information, which is something that librarians do on a regular basis. It's mining data, and data is really just about information. data points together will create something that is actionable. And the essential duties, if you work through it, are basically to summarize findings and to develop intelligence reports and briefing documents. We'll talk a little bit about that in a bit as well. Compiling and tracking the requests to look for trends and to look for repeat requests as well. And I think what's important to point out here to this crowd is that the specific requirement is a course of study in library or information sciences. People want librarians and library skills to do CI. And I think that's really, really exciting for the field because it shows that librarians can add value and they can be strategic, and we can go beyond the data dump into creating something that is decision ready and is actionable. And I will keep harping on that, I apologize, but I think it's important to understand that we've moved beyond the days of just giving people information. So what do we do with that information? How do we do it? So traditionally, if we were to look at this competitive intelligence cycle, we have decision makers, and those decision makers all have needs. And we're going to talk a little bit about how you can anticipate those needs in the future, but they have needs. Those needs require some sort of planning and direction, which in the competitive intelligence world, we would call this a key intelligence topic. And that's sort of where your executives would tell you what they're interested in, what their key topics are of interest. And then you would go off and do some secondary research. And that's traditionally where information professionals and librarians used to sit. They used to sit in and around item number 2, doing secondary research, often not knowing why they were doing the research. And I would argue that using the reference interview is actually a great place for librarians to use their elicitation skills to find out exactly why you need the information or why whoever's coming to you for the information needs it, so that you can aid in the analysis, which is step 4. Then there's human intelligence collection. For me, this is the key differentiator in good CI. Everybody has access to the same information. In these days of the internet, everybody has access to tons and tons and tons of information. And what sets your organizations apart is the human element. What you're getting from your people is going to be different. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in the future. Then you're going to do some sort of analysis. You're going to report, and then you're going to give it back to the decision makers, who may, from that, create a new need and a new key intelligence topic. What might also happen is there will be another use over at the side. So you'll do this whole research and gather your human intelligence, put it together in some sort of analysis framework, summarize it in a lovely report, and find out that there's a whole new area of things that just came out, a whole new area of research that needs to be undertaken that had nothing to do with the original topic, nothing to do with what you were setting out to find. But that's great. I mean, that's what feeds the intelligence cycle. So how do you take all of this and go from being a firefighter, and I label it a firefighter, but really what it is, you're sitting at your reference desk in your library and somebody comes in and all in a panic and says, oh my God, I need information on blah, 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 blah. Well, the idea is that you can keep the fire out by anticipating those needs and creating a situation in which you're not constantly being reactive, and you can start to be proactive, whether it's putting systems in place so that people come to you when they're about to light their match as opposed to their hairs are already on fire. And you can move slowly towards providing ongoing actionable intelligence by knowing your client, by providing the added value, which is the analysis, and then moving into the actionable intelligence. So if you look at your pictures that you've drawn, if you look at the pictures that you've drawn, hopefully somewhere in there, you've moved beyond just a little person sitting at the desk, and you're actually out and talking to people, because you need to know your business. You need to know your client. So the next question is, and I believe there's a poll for this as well, how many of you know your business and have a strategic plan? So let's throw that poll up there now. How many of you know your business's strategic plan? Or even know that a strategic plan exists, for that matter? The first step in knowing your client is understanding who your audience is. And in fact, there are two audiences. Is that poll up there?
Yes, it is. It's starting
Awesome.
to tally results.
Awesome. I think it's just a good baseline for people to use in terms of how well they know their organizations.
Right now, 62% know their strategic plan, 32 do not, and 6 want to know what a strategic plan is.
So a little bit higher than we actually had in Memphis, which is good to know. Hopefully maybe some of those people are people who went back from Memphis to learn what their strategic plans were. You sit in an organization and you spend all day filling requests as a firefighter or otherwise, and you fill those requests not knowing how they fit into the scheme of things. That's not really helpful. It would be like going to the grocery store and not going with a list or not having a sense of why you're there. You would never do that. And the same thing when you go to work every day. You shouldn't go to work every day not understanding not just where you fit in the organization, and we can talk about that in terms of being having internal clients, but also not understanding what the work you are doing will contribute to the overall organization. So the first thing you want to do, knowing the strategic plan is one thing, but what you want to do is understand who your audience is. And I would argue that everybody has at least 2 primary audience categories at work. You have your internal clients, and those are the people who come to you and say, I need this, I need that. It could be sales, it could be marketing, it could be the BD people, R&D people, whoever it is that makes requests of your library on a daily basis. And then there are the external clients, and those are the clients that are whose needs are met or services are provided to by your company. So they're not necessarily the people that you are in direct contact with, but they're the people that your audience is in direct contact with. And you need to understand how both of these audiences operate and what the needs of both of these audiences are. And keep that in mind whenever you're doing research, whenever you're looking for that actionable intelligence or looking for that decision-ready information that you're going to give to your client. You need to know, how is my internal client going to use this to face their external client? But you also need to understand who your internal client is so that you can be and you can start to think about ways of being proactive and getting out of that firefighting mode. Knowing what your strategic plan is will absolutely help that, because you can start to anticipate the needs. You can start to understand that if our strategic plan is to be the best at what we do and maybe to acquire smaller companies on the way to being the best at what we do, when I'm asked to do research, it might be in support of that goal. And knowing that, you can start to anticipate those needs and provide that information almost before you're asked for it. You're going to want to know who your key competitors are in your market, either as an overall sense of who the competitors are or on a product and service line, because it may be different. Specifically for people who have regional companies, regional competitors might be different versus sort of national or international competitors where you might have a broader base. And you'll want to know who your industry is as well and how you fit within the overall industry. Important things here are to keep your industry and your competitor analyses current and factual. And depending on your industry, you may or may not need to update these things more often. You know, in my case, in the law firm world, there aren't new major firms popping up on a regular basis. There are mergers happening all the time. And I need to keep on top of those, but there aren't new players coming in on a ongoing basis. In the consumer products market, it's a little bit different. So you're going to want to keep on top of that and know for your industry how often you need to update these sorts of profiles. Sorry. So how are you going to meet your client needs? So intelligence or information professionals, librarians, can support the C-suite through a series of products. And those products include current awareness monitoring, which I'm sure many of you are already doing. You can support your client needs through RFP responses, through early warning systems, and we'll talk about all of these things in a little bit more detail in a minute, through social media monitoring, and through feeding human intelligence, which I touched on a little bit earlier. And then, of course, keeping the information up to date. And you can do this either in-house through some sort of devised system. Excel is your friend, Word can be your friend, whatever works for you. Or of course, there's a myriad of outsourced tools, and anybody who's interested, I'm happy to share with you sort of what tools I use on a regular basis. You may not be there yet where you're looking for outsourced tools. You may actually not even be at the stage yet internally where you're, have a system for tracking all of this information. That's also what's going to move you from being a firefighter to being a trusted advisor. Is the more you can systemically approach this information, the more you can put this information together on an ongoing and consistent basis to meet those client needs, the better off you're going to be. But it takes time. I don't expect anybody to be able to swallow the ocean whole when setting up a CI program. It's best to start small, start manageable, start with things like a current awareness monitoring, start with maybe one RFP response, do one RFP response a year, backfilled by good CI, and help your organization win that RFP. And then you can look at ways of expanding your program. Meeting your client needs, these are all of the things you can do. They're not necessarily the only things you can do, nor are they the only things that you should do. It's just sort of a place to start. So let's talk about current awareness monitoring, or not, because apparently I didn't put that slide in here, but we can talk anyway about current awareness monitoring. What does current awareness monitoring mean? It means having that crystal ball, that librarian 2.0 feature. It means creating some way in which you get information out to people, whether it's through automated and annotated newsletters, which many of the databases that you subscribe to on a regular basis, you can use them to set up those alerts for you. And you can have a whole bunch of alerts feed into a newsletter platform. You can set this up automatically. You can do it yourself. And as you do it yourself, you can annotate it and send it back out to people. And simply by annotating articles and sending them back out to people, that in and of itself creates added value. And that in and of itself turns information into something that is actionable and decision ready. So it's not enough to just send somebody an article and say, hey, I read this article, I think it might be of use to you. What is it that might be of use to you? Send only things that pass the, quote, so what test. And that you can do with current awareness monitoring. RFP responses is another way to meet your client needs. And I said, one of the things you can do is start by helping to respond to one RFP. So for people who are unfamiliar with the RFP process, it's a request for proposal that is sent to companies by a prospect, and the prospect will send out a series of questions that says, essentially, tell me why your product or service is the best, why I should buy your product or service versus a competitor's product or service. Often, we will know who the incumbent is that is providing that product or service. So if you go to a movie theater and there's candy bars at the movie theater and they're all by a particular brand, it may be that that brand won an RFP that movie company had pitched to say, who can supply us with the best candy bars at the best price. Your job as a librarian in supporting, or an information professional, CI professional, in supporting an RFP response is to understand who else might be bidding on the work, who is likely to win the work, and what what other people might be, and what other organizations who you aren't really aware of might be responding to that work as well. So that's sort of the blue ocean strategy of thinking outside of your own named competitors. Who else might bid on that work? What other confectionery companies might want to say, hey, we want to go into movie theaters? And then working with your PR people, working with your BD people, your marketing people, and understanding how to respond to that RFP in a way that positions your company the best based on the information that you've collected. That's how you can meet their needs and be that crystal ball feature, be that anticipating and forecasting of the future by, this is what's happened in the past, this is what might happen in the future. One of the ways you can start to think about these things is by creating an early warning system. There's many ways you can do this, and one of the ways you can do this is by looking at public companies particularly will retain counsel for a variety of things, whether it's legal counsel, financial counsel, M&A counsel, And you can track all of this through their public filings, through CIDR for those of you that are in Canada, for EDGAR for those of you that are in the States. There are services you can buy like Westlaw, DisclosureNet, things like that, that can do this for you. They can track this stuff for you, set up alerts, and send them right into your inbox. So right into your inbox, you'll get an email that tells you that your competitor has retained financial counsel for something. You may not know what that something is, but if they've retained financial counsel, you can usually guess it's they're going into audit season, or they're looking to make a purchase or a sale or something of that nature. You can also set up an early warning system for changed market conditions. Appointment notices. Everybody likes to brag about sort of new CEOs or new director level people that they've hired. And if you go to the back of any of major daily newspapers, you're gonna or financial papers, you're gonna see these great glossy ads of pictures of people like, oh, we've hired this new CEO. Start to collect that data, and over time you'll see that if they've hired a whole bunch of if your competitors hired a whole bunch of executives from one or another company and put those together in such a way that you can start to see trends. So all of a sudden they've hired a whole bunch of executives that are younger maybe, or a whole bunch of executives that have experience in a new area that that competitor traditionally hasn't had experience in. Similarly, you want to look at, or a way to consider this, is to look at their recruiting efforts. Who are they recruiting? What kind of jobs are they looking? What kind of jobs are they posting? If they're posting for a new job that maybe they haven't done before, like maybe they're posting for a social media person, which is new for this organization, then that means that they're going after a younger audience maybe, or maybe it means that they recognize that they need to start to change the way they're doing things. And we're going to talk about too, social media monitoring, since I just mentioned the social media physician. Think about all of the social media that goes on these days, and it's funny that we still take social media out and create a separate category for it, when really it could be in your current awareness monitoring, which was the first thing that you were setting up to meet your client needs. Social media should really be treated no differently than any other media. Twitter feeds, Facebook feeds, LinkedIn groups, Quora, SlideShare, all of those places are great places to mine for information related to your competitors, information related to your industry landscape, as well as your individual market by region. And it's a great place to just go, even if you're not a tweeter yourself, it's a good place to go and search and to mine that data and use those data points in conjunction with all of this other stuff to create a picture of where the market is heading, so that you can continue to be proactive and you can continue to forecast, as it were. And then we talked feeding human intelligence again, and I will harp on this, because to me human intelligence is the key differentiator. The key thing that will make people competitive in a market is harnessing the both internal intelligence that they get from all the people that are around them, as well as externally. So you have salespeople that are going out and doing sales calls all the time. Find out who they're talking to. Find out what their people are saying on the street, both about you and about your competitors. Why aren't they buying from you? Why did we lose that RFP? And better yet, why did we win that RFP? Go back to the person who, just hired you and gave you the RFP and say, hey, we won this work. Why did we win this work? What about our response won us the work? And that human piece, that human element that you won't get from any database, is actually going to be the difference between winning a future RFP or creating some new product line or something, right? It's all about how you use these data points. It's entirely important to understand that the human element is really, really what makes us different. And as the central hub for information within our organizations, we have the opportunity to create internal networks and data centers, so that if you imagine all of the information you have access to and all of the databases you have access to, and Factiva and Lexis, and we talked about public filings, and whether you're using Securities Mosaic, or you're using Westlaw Business, or you're using DisclosureNet, any of these things, think about all the information that's in everybody's head. And all of that information is equal or better than any of those databases that are out there. But you've got to get that information out of people's heads and into some sort of internal network or internal data center. Other people you're going to want to tap on a regular basis is R&D, KM, market research. So of course, many of you are thinking like, how do I do that? How do I reach out to my R&D people or my sales people or my market research people? Again, as with everything, start small. Start with coffee once a week, once a month, once a quarter, whenever you can manage it, um, with a salesperson, with somebody in the R&D department. Just say, hey, what are you guys working on? How can I meet your information needs? What is it that you think you might need? Or the reverse is let them talk. Use your elicitation skills, let them talk, ask them questions, get a sense for what they're doing, and then walk away and think, okay, how can I support that? What information needs can I provide that will be in support of that? Same thing with accounting data, CRM or customer relationship management and other external databases that exist. Syndicated research, we talked a little bit about McKinsey and Bain and Boston and Deloitte, KPMG. All these people create third-party syndicated research. I'm not suggesting you shouldn't use that research, but use it as one data point or two data points, not as the sole data point that's going to make a decision happen. Of course, we've mentioned several subscription databases and monitoring tools and analysis reference tools. What you want to do is put all this stuff together, almost like put it all into a big centrifuge, spin it all around, and then see what comes out. And what comes out is going to be your analysis. I've heard, particularly I heard at the Leadership Summit in 2013, that librarians are scared of analysis. And I think that is so incredibly misguided, because librarians are some of the best minds out there to be doing analysis. Analysis is not the domain of the finance people or the MBAs in the world, the marketing people. Analysis is the domain of anybody who deals in data. And I put up a quote here from Dr. Craig Fleischer and Babette Bensasin about what competitive analysis actually is. And I think the key things are pulled out here in red are, you want to produce insightful findings through a process. So through putting it all in that centrifuge and spinning it around and then spitting out a product. So it's not just enough to do the analysis, you actually have to spit it out into a product. And I'll show you that in a minute. And the analysis has to pass the so what test. So put it all in, spin it around, spit something out like a report or a diagram or something, and then say, so what? What do I do with this? What is the next move? What decision can I take? What action can I take? How can I move an agenda forward? How can I align this with our strategic plan? And you can do it through using an analysis framework. So what is an analysis framework? An analysis framework, if you will, it's a picture frame. It's a context. It's a way of taking all of that data, attaching a perspective to it, and then explaining that perspective. It's really not any more complicated than that. And the frameworks tend to be universally understood. So if you're doing a SWOT, which is a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, for those of you that are unfamiliar, everybody sort of understands what a SWOT analysis is. And if you say, oh, I'm preparing a SWOT analysis, or I'm preparing a four corners analysis, people sort of understand more or less what that means. And I'll give you an example of a timeline analysis. And the next three, or I think it's the next three slides, are actually taken from a competitive intelligence division conference session that was held in 2012 by Michael Bernacchi and Fred Wergeles, both of whom are on the CID board, as you know. And this is taken from a presentation that they did, which Dr. Fleischer will be reprising a part of this as a quick take in Vancouver. So don't miss that if this is something that is of interest to you. So a timeline analysis will display events in chronological order in some sort of graphical manner, which is important for people who are maybe not good with words. They're not graphic, sorry, they like graphics to learn. And it's a way for you to identify important trends and relationships between competitors' businesses or between your own. You don't necessarily have to always do this with competitors. You can do a timeline analysis of your own services and products to help you understand where you might want to go. The idea is that it's a systemic layout of events related to a key question or a key intelligence topic, as we talked about when we talked about the CI cycle. You're going to look for events, trends, patterns, sequences, and maybe how management of the competitor organizations handled those, or maybe how the market responded to those. Maybe your question is around the marketing of those things. So whatever your intelligence topic is or your question that you're being asked, you're going to use the timeline analysis to help you understand how things in the past may affect things in the future. You're going to summarize the events, and then you're going to make a hypothesis. So this is what it would look like if you were any of these three competitors and you were looking at healthy, green, and socially conscious initiatives that were taken between 2000 and 2010. And I've been asked in the past, do you do this backwards or do you do it forward looking? Do you draw a line in the sand and say we're going to look at everything from 2014 going forward, or we're going to look from 2014 backwards to 1994 or whatever it is? And again, the question you ask will determine how far back and how far forward and when you need to start these things. So there's no hard and fast rule for when the analysis needs to start and stop, when the data points need to start and stop. This is all part of that methodology that you're going to create along with your peers in other departments and the people who are your C-suite whose needs you're meeting with this type of analysis. You're going to decide that together, sort of in terms of the framework. Where do we want to start? How do we want to build this thing out? And then you go and build it out. What's important to note here is how graphic this is, how easily understood it is. Even things like all of the comments relating to Starbucks are in green, all of the comments relating to Dunkin' Donuts are in pink, and McDonald's are in blue, so that if you are quickly glancing at it and maybe the logos aren't in your purview, you know the blue is related to McDonald's and the green is related to Starbucks. Any little things that you can do to help the information more easily understood, the better you can do that, the easier you can do that, the better it is for your constituents and to meet their needs. This is not enough, so you're going to want to take this. You're going to want to take this sort of analysis, and you could do this for any line. I mean, this particular example is for healthy, green, and socially conscious efforts, but you could do the same thing for any other type of initiative. And what you're going to want to do with this is then you're going to want to create some sort of report. Generally speaking, with reports, less is more. So highlight your summary, and how you communicate is almost as important as what you communicate, okay? Think about in the past, we'd give people a data dump. We'd give people pages and pages and pages and pages and pages of information, and we'd say, here you go, here's what you asked for. So if we go back to our timeline and we look at 10 years worth of media and marketing, and maybe around 2008, we would have started to see some social media related to these things. If we put this all together and just printed out every tweet, every marketing campaign, every new slogan that came out, and we put it all in a binder, you'd end up with probably three 3-inch binders, one for each of these people. Instead, what you've done is created one PowerPoint slide with all of this information. Now, in real life, you probably won't present it as a PowerPoint slide, although you may. It will depend on your audience. So I bring you back to that data dump question to say, what does that say about your understanding of your client needs and of the client issues if you just hand them back three 3-inch binders as opposed to handing them back a succinct graphic of everything that they need to know? One of the things you're going to want to do is you're going to want to create a series of CI and research-related products that communicate concisely and simply an answer to their question. I'm not suggesting you don't need to keep all of that other data. Often in my reports, at the end of my reports, I let them know of other data that's available to them, other reports that I've used. If I've leaned on a McKinsey report or a Bain report, I may not give them the entire McKinsey or Bain report, but I will somewhere in my stack of papers have that report with the highlighted sections that I used to create my analysis, that I used to create my hypothesis. I let them know that it's available to them, but I don't use their valuable time to have to troll through that. I've already done that hard work for them. When you're communicating this stuff, even in voicemail and email, you want to be to the point, address the specific project, and then in your reports and memos, you want to adjust priorities. Always put your methodology up front. So we gather data for the last 10 years, we put it into this spreadsheet, or we put it into this timeline analysis. These were the limitations of our data. These were the criteria that we used to collect our data, address the key priority or the business driver, the dilemma, the decision they're trying to make, have a sharp summary that says, based on your decision that you need to make, here's what I recommend, or based on the decision that you need to make, here are the 5 or 6 or 7 facts you need to know. And then you can provide them with an opportunity for next steps, whether those are next steps that you can take as a researcher or next steps that they're going to take in aid of their decision. So here's an example of how I do this. I always have an executive summary up front. I include my methodology. I include a note on my data and how I collected my data. I provide the analysis, and then, however many images need to go along with that. Always include some sort of limitation, because there's always human error. There's always limitations in the data that you can collect. Some of your human intelligence may not be as reliable or reputable as some of the third-party data, or vice versa for that matter. You can't always, rely on everything you read in the third-party information. And then a conclusion. And how you become a leader, which is ultimately what we're talking about here, is using this information to ultimately make you a leader. The way you do that is constantly articulating your value and demonstrating some sort of intelligence expertise. So I'm kind of unpacking this quote here as I read it to you, but you support business goals through adding value and through being effective in your communication. And I can't stress that last part enough. Being effective in your communication is almost as important as being able to do the analysis. And it may be that different people on your team are better writers, different people, if you have the luxury of working in a team. If you're a sole provider, then you might need to get some help in some of these areas and get some training in some of these areas to help you provide the whole package. You may be really good at the analysis and really good at the visualization of it, but not really good at putting it together, or really good at putting it together and synthesizing the information, but you need somebody else to actually, work in Visio to create that little analysis framework for you. You're going to be a trusted advisor if they no longer need to go to Google, they automatically go to you instead. And rather than reading a McKinsey report, they ask you to read the McKinsey report and pull out the salient points for them. You're going to become a trusted leader and an advisor within your organizations if you can provide information that is client-specific and anticipated actionable intelligence. Some other resources that are available to you to aid in doing this, and I said, some of the areas you may need to work in if you don't feel that you're there. There is, of course, the SLA CID, under the auspices of which we are doing this webinar. There's SCIP, which I mentioned early on. I provided a definition from SCIP. There's the Intelligence Collaborative, AAIP, and other organizations as well. Professional development, there is the SLA CID. We are doing the CE course that Michael mentioned earlier in Vancouver, and I encourage anybody who's interested to join us for that. It's going to be sort of a 4-hour nuts and bolts, how to do this stuff, a much broader based or more in depth, depending on how you look at it, summary of this kind of thing. ClickU, which is SLA's university, they were doing CI courses. They've stopped, but I'm sort of putting the bug in their ear to bring them back. ICI, Fold, Mercyhurst College, those are all sort of other places you can go as well. And finally, what's next? Get out in plain sight. Get out and talk to the people in your organization. Start to create that human intelligence database of information. Engender trust within your organization, and getting out of your libraries, getting away from the desk where you're constantly being the firefighter is what's going to help you to engender that trust. Get out of the library. Don't be on the desk when they come. I mean, obviously you need to be on the desk if you need to be on the desk because that's your job and you don't want to lose your job for the sake of doing CI. But what you want to try to do is step away when you can and go out and talk to people. And by talking to people, whether it's part of a monthly coffee chat or it's just an informal, hey, what are you working on in the R&D department? You're going to start to engender trust, and you're going to be able to use that trust to anticipate needs. And by anticipating needs, you can provide better information that will be actionable. Don't collect a ton of data for data's sake. Make sure you engage that human element, and make sure that you put all of the information together in some sort of way that is decision ready, to again quote the Financial Times report, that is both decision ready and can create some sort of actionable intelligence. And that's pretty much it. I know I make it sound simple, and I know that it's not, and I know that it's very time consuming to do any one of these things. So like I've said several times, start small. Don't try to swallow the ocean whole. There are mentors in the CI division. There are people out there who can help you sort of frame one or two little projects to start with, and then move forward from there. Thank you, and good luck to all of you in your CI efforts. Michael, I think I'll hand it back to you now.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gina. And you gave this presentation down in Memphis, I think a little less than a month ago, and we heard incredible feedback. And I think you either covered everything there is to cover, or you left them speechless. There are currently no questions. Feel free to submit some questions. We have a few minutes to cover those questions. Well done, Gina. I do have a couple in that, I think what you put forward here, I've seen in real life in terms of, you can go from librarian to CI professional. It is real. Would you mind, and there are challenges behind that in terms of, how you get from that librarian and collecting role to sort of analyzing and communicating role. Would you be able to, or mind sharing, either what you see out there or your experience based on overcoming those challenges of getting from that, collector role to the analysis role? And, I know you work with knowledge management and the library function. I know you've got a couple of CI analysts. Is there anything you could kind of throw out there from a real life sort of perspective?
Yes, sorry, I was just trying to get my slides back here. Yeah, so how you can transition from doing that, it's not, it's sort of an interesting question. I mean, one of the ways you want to transition is really by talking to people and understanding their needs. And it can start really, really small. It can start really with, you talk to somebody and they tell you that they've been monitoring some issue that you're unaware of. And then the next time an article pops up related to that, you send it to them with a little annotation. And I think even just doing something like that will help you bridge that gap, will help you move um, from being a straight information provider to that client understanding that you can do more than just provide the information, that you've listened, that you've heard what their needs are, and that you can understand the issue and pull out some sort of commentary related to it. I don't know if that really answers your question, but
Yep. No, that's great. Craig asks, do you have any words of wisdom on ways to balance the info pro role along the spectrum of the, stick fetcher to CI, future prognosticator, especially when both ends are needed?
how do you balance those roles?
Yeah.
It's a really good question. I think you need to provide the information that's provided, but a lot of that in this day and age, depending on what that looks like in your organizations, a lot of that can be actually automated. And the more of that you can automate, and I know that's a chilling sound for people, the more automation, the scarier it seems, because it means that, a computer can replace you. But I would say the opposite. The more you can automate the creation sort of newsletters related to a single topic, the more you can spend time actually doing analysis. And a lot of the outsourced CI companies that are out there, not a lot of, but several of them, what they'll do for you is they'll automate that process for you so that it will free up a librarian time to actually do analysis. And again, you don't have to do it all at once. You don't have to replace jobs to do it. In fact, what you can do is start to add more value to your job because you're not doing the tasks that in this day and age actually can be automated. There are databases that house a lot of this information, and a lot of the newspapers and things are online. A lot of the information is online. A lot of the journals and information that people access is online. And by putting it online, there's a taxonomy attached to it. So there's filtering and criteria that are attached to it, and all of that can be harnessed and mined automatically, which would then free up librarian time. So you can move yourself along the spectrum by automating some of that, sort of rote work that we do.
Great. Craig says, good insights. Thanks. Another question from Cindy. She says, how big is your team? It seems massive.
It's not. There's me, and there's one other full-time analyst, and then I have two part-time analysts.
Okay.
So I guess that's a team of 3 full-time people.
Great.
We
And
just
Maurice asked, can we get a copy of this PowerPoint presentation? And I think at SLA CID will be tweeting that out once we get that
yes.
up. So if you're not following us, please do follow us. And
The presentation that I did for SLA Leadership Summit is a little bit broader, just more for an in-person presentation versus a webinar, and that will be up on the CID's website, or sorry, on this SLA's headquarter website at some point as well.
great. Another question from Anne. She says, do you use LinkedIn for CI work? Any issues you've discovered? If so.
So yes, I use LinkedIn for CI work, and yes, there are issues I've discovered. I'll give you a little bit of information there. The problem with LinkedIn is that if you don't have a premium account and you're trolling other people's profiles, it will potentially tell those other people that such and such has seen their profile. So if you don't care about that, that's not an issue. I do use it to track down people. I do use it to find people. I also use it to monitor groups and to help my attorneys who have particular interests in particular areas will help find them groups that they should either belong to or should be monitoring to help them stay up to date on their clients. So we do use it for a variety of sources. And we do, I'm just trying to think how many people have an account beyond a premium account. And there are a few of us that have accounts beyond the original sort of free account.
Okay.
Hope that answers your question.
And the last question from Lori says, how do you use big data? And if you do, what statistical analysis software do you recommend?
Oh boy. So we use Redwood, which is one of the industry standards for the legal world. We do use big data. Our role, it's just such a huge question. How do you use big data? So, I mean, big data really is just a term that means that using data that exists, that's being collected passively as well as actively. My short response would be, I wrote a book called Big Data for Law Firms. Read that and it'll answer your question. To sum it all up in 2 minutes, though, how do I use big data? We use it to support our decisions in terms of what accounts are profitable versus not profitable, which clients we want to go after and not go after. We use it in terms of understanding our market position. It's sort of a really big question to answer without a more specific question in mind. And I think that's key both for CI and for BI and business intelligence, is you've got to have a really specific question you want to be answering. And the more specific your question can be, the more the data can give you the answer you're looking for. It's hard to look for a needle in a haystack when you don't even know what that needle looks like.
Yep, no, I'm with you there. Great. And last question from Michelle, bear with me here, says, you can learn CI, show value, and then get your title changed to CI manager. I do comp intel for my company, just one person, it can be done. Lots of analysis, reports, execs ask for it, as well as other levels when you've done it for a while. How can you evaluate the effectiveness to improve besides feedback survey? And then the question is, a CI tool is needed for the glut of news. What do you know that works good? And you may just have to ping Gina offline and figure that out, because that's a question a lot of us have out there. So.
That was a big question. I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to be responding to.
It was. Is there a tool out there that you know of that can handle a glut of news?
There are. Am I allowed to do endorsements for certain organizations?
I wouldn't do them online. I would.
No, I know. I'm kidding. I wouldn't either. And again, that'll meet your specific needs. Every organization and every culture is going to be accepting of a different kind of software. So I'm happy to give you a rundown of some of the ones that I know that are out there offline that may or may not meet your needs. So ping me
Great.
at ZAppleCI or ApplebaumZ@BennettJones.com. And that's Z for you Americans.
All right, great, Gina. Fantastic job as usual. And again, keep your eye out. Follow at SLA CID to get our upcoming webinars and other interesting news. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today, and we'll see you in February. Bye.